Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome back to the show. We've got a great guest for you today. We've got Cynthia Rando. She's the founder and CEO of Sophic Synergistics. She's spent 15 years in the field of human factors and human-centered design and 12 years at NASA's Johnson Space Center, leading several culture change initiatives and innovative solutions for the agency. She's adept at providing breakthrough leadership to achieve corporate strategies, built coalition to support business growth, and implement and manage change to drive organizational performance. She's proficient with C-level decision makers of large companies, including supervising new business development activities for partnership, membership, and collaboration. Welcome to the show, Cynthia.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. You've got some great content to help people with, so let's get right into it. Tell us about your business and what types of customers that you're helping.
Sure. So my business is Sophic Synergistics, and we're basically in the business of helping people and meeting people's needs. And what that means specifically is we try to help organizations not only with their people inside the organizations, but also with providing the best customer products that a company can. So in reality, we provide 360-degree services by addressing needs that are either left unmet in terms of the marketplace or needs that are not so obvious sometimes when you're looking at an organization that's always so focused on moving forward, and we help try to identify opportunities within both realms.
So these companies that you speak of, are they startups or are these companies that have been established for a while? Could you go in a little bit deeper than that with that?
Sure. So, our marketplace is anybody that has human beings. So any company at all, ranging from small to large to government as well as startups, has a use for our services. And when we're talking about smaller companies, a lot of times they start to experience problems with change and growth. So it's always good to bring in our services to help look at the organization to best position it for the company's new vision and new posture. And then when you're looking at startup type companies, a lot of times these companies can benefit by bringing in a consultant where they don't have to bring somebody in full time to help them maximize their human-centered design of their products, because they only have one chance to market. And you may have the most innovative product known to man, but it doesn't matter if people can't use it and can't figure out, what it needs to them or what need it's actually meeting in the marketplace.
So you mentioned that you spent 12 years at NASA, but what led you to this field and how did you get started in the business?
Great question. I think it was all by accident. But, I started out as a human factors engineer in the technical realm, building space hardware. And then I had a lot of opportunities to move into the business realm, leading their efforts and bringing crowdsourcing on board for the first time for the government. And also all government agencies were able to leverage what NASA put in place. And so based on those two activities, I really started to notice that there was a gap in the business world and how we did strategy and business development. We sort of leave the human out of the equation, and we don't always acknowledge that in order for a business to thrive, the people within it have to thrive. And it all goes back to something so simple as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you meet the needs of the people, you meet the needs of your customer, you're optimized on both sides, which helps fuel innovation in a very competitive organization and a healthy organization. Hence, Sophic was born.
Awesome. Along the way, I love asking this question to entrepreneurs that I interview. Was there a specific book that inspired you along the way or helped you?
I've read a lot of books, but, being a NASA geek, so to speak, I really latched on to Failure is Not an Option. And I think that's a wonderful book, although from an innovation perspective, you do want to fail early and fail often, because that creates a space where the risk is lower, but the reward is greater once you figure out the ways that work on the higher risk end. So, but I recommend this read. It's very inspiring from a exploration and charting yourself into an unknown, which is exactly what entrepreneurs do. They're stepping out of their comfort zone and going for a spacewalk. When you step out into the unknown and you don't know what's ahead of you necessarily, but you're about to break a space wide open.
Very cool. I'm glad you explained that about fail often and fail quickly. It's important because that's how we learn. But in your scenario with NASA, it's failure is not an option for sure. At some point.
Absolutely. When the stakes are higher, you don't want to be in failure mode.
Exactly. So what motivates you and makes you jump out of bed every morning to help people? What is your true passion?
Well, I think it's just that. It's passion for people and passion for doing things to help improve our state of being, whether it's helping an organization, break through to the other side or solve some problems, or it's helping bring a new innovation or an idea to market. It's all just exciting. And it takes a team to do it, but it also takes the ability to maximize people's potential. And that's the part I really love, is knowing that, along the way I played a part in being able to do that, whether it's for a person individually or it's for a company.
Perfect. The problems that you're seeing, or when companies come to you, what is the most common problem or obstacle they're facing to get to the next level, or how do they utilize their most valuable assets of people? What are you seeing that are the challenges?
Yeah, good question. Almost always it's a problem where the culture has ended up because the company has been very focused on moving fast and moving forward. And in today's world, we're in a very competitive, high-paced, technologically advanced world, and so the rate of change is exponential, and it's really hard for the human being to keep up with that and be consistent and be innovative all the time. It's really a recipe for burnout, and so what often happens is, we forget the company for its people, and we stop addressing the needs of the organization, and we get too focused on what we're driving to without making sure everybody's equipped to achieve that goal holistically. And, that leads to the second issue. It's always a lack of alignment within the organization to these goals, and also consistent leadership to march towards those goals.
Have you found that, there's companies that have vested employees or employees that have been there for a while? Have you found that they haven't been, open to change versus millennials, or has there been anything that you've seen?
Well, working for NASA was a very special environment because before I went out on my own as a consultant, that environment for the first time had probably about 5 different generations represented under one roof, and there was always a difficulty in communicating between the generations because they all spoke a different language. So there was that problem, was being able to communicate in a language we all understood so that we could align within the organization. And then to your first point, that culture, has been very seated in a very certain way. And so it was very hard for them to understand the importance of change, because if it ain't broke, why fix it? But the failure to get ahead of the curve and recognize that change is inevitable was very problematic. And so when we were trying to implement the crowdsourcing and the new business models I spoke of earlier, it was really, really difficult, and it became a door-to-door salesman type approach to get early adopters on board and get champions within the organization that could help make the business case to the organization of why it was a benefit and just not another job or a new flavor of the month activity.
I've heard that often, the new flavor of the month. So
right.
You rally champions, and they're, they might be part of the Good Old Boy Network or the Good Old Girl Network, and you find some champions. Explain that a little bit. How can champions help you accomplish the goals that you're trying to reach for these corporations?
So these are the people that are usually always on the early adopter or the innovative scale. When you see them within the organization, they're usually the people that the rest of the mass gets irritated with really easily because they're always the one rocking the boat or threatening the status quo. But they're also the most valuable to the organization because they're the ones that are going to help you recognize the need to change and also help you get there. And so these champions become very powerful tools for you because they already see what's coming before everybody else does. The vision is there, but also the persistence and the presence of mind to also communicate the value to the organization is also there because they already understand the value. And so if you can get folks that are already working within the organization, understand what's important to the organization and the needs of the organization, your champions become your most valuable asset.
Absolutely. Thanks for explaining that. That's you definitely want to get them on your side. So when companies come to you and they've stalled, or maybe not stalled, but maybe they've gone so far and now they're experiencing challenges, maybe in a safety aspect or maybe in a manufacturing aspect, what would be one of the first things that you would do to try to help them?
Right. So, at this point, it's usually going to require an unbiased entity to get to the true root cause of the problems. And, with culture issues, it's not what you can see and quickly identify as the problems going on in the organization. It's what you don't see lurking beneath the culture. Stuff that started to fester beneath the surface that has been caused by the organization's disregard for the needs of the organization or not understanding that there's a mismatch between what the company is trying to do at the corporate level versus where the employees are at the lower working levels. And so what I do is I come in and I try to take a pulse of a realistic look or capture in time of what's going on in the company from the day-to-day on multiple different levels, whether you're looking at the people at the line or in management and also at the higher CEO level, and really get an unbiased view. And it really does take someone who's outside the organization, because when you bring in somebody who's internal, there's a tendency to excuse certain problems or be afraid to air certain issues within the corporation.
Can you talk about or give us an example of someone that brought you in and how you help them overcome these challenges and get them on the right track?
Sure. So, there was an instance in time where we had an issue with strategy between two different groups in the same organization. And what was going on at the higher levels, unbeknownst to the organization, is the way they were organized and their separate mission goals and identities within the organization were actually driving them to work against each other. And so when I came in and started realizing what was going on, that they were really acting in competition with each other instead of in cooperation for the broader goals of the organization, it was really an aha moment for the organization, because they didn't realize that by giving these groups separate but competitive projects, that they really weren't achieving the goal of the organization and the alignment they were looking for. Perfect
answer. What would be your best piece of advice to a company that's reached a point where, they're not growing, obviously, or they need to get to the next level, or this is kind of a loaded question, but let's narrow it down. What if you have a company that's not performing well safety-wise? What would be your best piece of advice if they're considering bringing you in or going a different direction to fix that? What would be your best piece of advice?
Well, there's always a couple of things going on. I'd have to ask them a question of, what's changed within the organization? What's the track record here? What things have gone on within the organization? Let's say this has just transpired over the last year to 6 months. What things have they done or changed within the organization that started to lead to this issue? And also, what's going on, with the culture of the organization? Because a culture that is unhappy with the organization can actually lead to unsafe working circumstances. People aren't taking their jobs seriously. They're not taking the value of each other and having a safe work environment seriously, and that can also lead to issues like this. And also, are the tasks different? Has productivity actually gone up and output needs of the corporation gone up to where we're putting people in an unsafe circumstance to where there's not enough resources to accomplish the task? However, this hasn't been recognized because management is trying to meet the needs with less resources and meet unrealistic metrics. So those are all questions I would ask the organization to kind of get a feel for what type of variables could be at play, not just looking at the safety incidents. You have to look at what's going on a day-to-day within the organization that could lead to these events. And it's usually more than one thing.
When you come into these places, do you have some kind of instrument, meaning some kind of a document or some kind of a assessment that you go through to give you some indications of where they're at and how they close the gap?
Sure. I mean, it's tailored to every organization because the needs are so drastically different, but it's basically, what we look for from a human, centered design perspective. If you're talking about products, what are the requirements of the product? Who is the product going to? What does the design look at? What is the cradle to grave life cycle of the design? But if we're talking about organizational structure, we really start at ground zero with these companies and kind of ask them, what does the present state of their organization look like? Where do they want to go? And then we start looking at the problem areas that have become obvious or what we see above the surface of the company. And then I take a deeper dive individually in the company, looking between the ranks from, the line workers to the middle management to the top of the company to kind of identify what the real underlying root causes are to the problems that they're facing. So it's a real specialized approach. I don't have a one-size-fits-all tool. And it really does depend on the problems that they're experiencing.
Is there, once you find these challenges that they're having, how do you educate the employees to make them better or get them to that point?
Being in the human factors realm, education and training is always the last leg of the resolution loop, if you will. What you really want to look at is, what's going on in the task? How do we redesign the task to better fit the human in the organization? How do we restructure the organization to better fit the goals and the strategy that they're trying to adopt? And then you look at where do we have gaps in skill sets or resources to where we can help better equip the employees to not only improve on their job, but also to give them pathways to career development, because that's often a problem in very fast-moving organizations that people don't always have the resources or the mentorships to grow, and that creates an underlying culture of not motivated because I don't really have a place to go in this organization from a career perspective. So we really try to look at it from a 360 point of view.
Have you found that things that are going on outside of the workplace have affected what's going on in the workplace? I mean, do you go into that area of what's going on?
Absolutely. When you meet one-on-one with people, this stuff naturally comes out, especially if you create an environment of trust and non-threat for people. And that's why I always say it's really important for an organization to consider the value of bringing somebody in that doesn't have a vested interest in managing these people or, a place in deciding their fate, because they'll never give you the truthful answer because they're too afraid of, what's going to happen to them if they tell you the truth about what's wrong. And so, providing a safe haven for employees to really be open and honest about what they see and what they feel going on in the company is important, but also, what might be going on a day-to-day. If you've got Jimmy who's having a real bad time and is going through a divorce and he's bringing it to work every day and it's stressing out a whole department, then you've got a really serious problem, but you know where the root is. And so you can probably pretty easily help that employee with whatever resources they need outside of the workplace and maybe give them a break while also helping the team recover from that impact.
Got it. What is the process that you use, or how many people do you actually need to talk to or interview to get to the root of the problem? Is Is there a specific number or a cross-section of employees that you need to talk to? Or how does that work?
It's a good question. So the bigger the organization, the more people, because what you really want from a scientific perspective is a representative sample. And so that means taking, let's say the company has 1,000 employees, you may end up having to interact with at least 100 of them to get a good idea of what's going on. But it's 100 people in terms of, a couple from each department or directorate, depending on how you're organized. Also looking at demographics, if you have, 3 different generations represented in rank, you want to make sure that's represented in your sample that you pull. And then also, males, females, and, minority demographics as well. Whatever composition is naturally within the organization, you want to make sure is represented in your sample to get an accurate portrayal of what's going on. And it usually doesn't take long for there to be consistent themes that develop. Usually within the first 3 or 4 people you start talking to, especially if you've got good interview skills and are trained to do this, you'll start seeing a common thread, which you can pull on as the investigator.
I'm sure you've had or heard people that think they can do it themselves. Is that come up? I mean, what do you recommend if people think that they can do it themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. But, I caution them because what always happens is time and money and resources. When it becomes someone who has about 50 other jobs within the organization, they're going to cut corners, number one. They're also not necessarily going to be someone who's a non-threatening entity to somebody else within the organization. And number 3, they're not going to necessarily be trained to ask questions in the right way, because what you don't want to do is bias the response or everything is worthless that you've done. You've basically just driven your sample set to answer the way you want them to. So you want to be very careful that you're not imposing on the type of response you get, and you ask very clear questions that only your sample answers. That
was a great answer. I'm sure you've heard that before. But so the listeners or the readers are ready to take action, and they feel like that you can help them. What's the best way to find out more about what you do?
Sure. They can visit my website, www.sophicsynergistics.com. They can give me a call at 281-766-0616, or they can email me at Cynthia Rando at sophicsynergistics.com. All 3 of these ways will reach me, and there's a lot of good information on my website, as well as if you go on my LinkedIn profile, I also have some publications in this arena, as well as blogs on my website.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. That was a lot of great information to help people and their cultures, and I thank you for your time and being on the show.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
There you have it. This edition of the show. We'll see you the next time.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.